The movie begins with Brian Godlock frantically running through the streets of his neighborhood. In the distance, the sound of gunfire echoes, and he rushes toward it. He soon spots two cars full of rival gangsters in the middle of an intense shootout. One group manages to kill the other's driver, causing their car to crash. As the gangsters approach, Brian grabs a metal pipe, waiting until their car gets close before smashing the windshield. The gangsters retaliate, turning their guns on him, forcing Brian to flee. He spots a forklift and instinctively uses it to leap over the gangster's truck, decapitating one of the men in the process. Despite his quick thinking, Brian is shot in the back by one of the survivors, and another gangster, a heavily tattooed man, shoots him in the throat, leaving him for dead. Brian is rushed to the hospital, barely clinging to life, while his wife, Saya, prays for his recovery. After a tense period, doctors manage to save him, though his injuries are severe. He survives, but he has lost his voice due to the bullet wound in his throat. Brian slowly recovers physically, but the emotional toll is evident. Detective Vassell soon visits him at the hospital, looks him over, and leaves his card. After a few days, Brian wakes up, and Saya, overwhelmed with relief, rushes to his side, tears streaming down her face. Despite her happiness that he's awake, the fact that Brian can no longer speak haunts him. He begins physical therapy to regain his ability to walk, but the frustration of losing his voice consumes him. He often tries to scream at his reflection in the mirror, his eyes filled with tears. Saya tries to help by giving Brian an artificial voice box, but his frustration only grows. The more he tries to use it, the more defeated he feels, eventually leading him to shut down emotionally. After some time, Brian is discharged from the hospital. When they finally arrive home, the silence between them is palpable. He stares out at the now empty space, and the memory of Taylor's laugh cuts him deeply. Inside the house, Taylor's toys still sit on the table, alongside a Christmas tree with presents beneath it. Brian breaks down in tears, unable to cope with the loss of his child. Saya tries to comfort him as he cries uncontrollably, holding him as he sobs. Nearby, on a table, a news report on Taylor's death plays in the background. Brian, enraged, rips the report to shreds, his emotions too overwhelming to contain. He goes to the kitchen, grabs a bottle of vodka, and silently mouths for Saya to help him. She, lost in her own grief, breaks down in tears, unsure of how to support him. The following morning, Saya prepares for work, and it's clear Brian didn't sleep in their bed the night before. She finds him in another room, drinking alone. She texts him, asking if he's seen her keys, but he doesn't respond, still lost in memories of Taylor. Desperate for some connection, Brian goes to Taylor's room, which has been left untouched. He sits on the bed, tears filling his eyes before lying down, remembering the feeling of having his son beside him. The heartache is unbearable. Later, he sits in the front yard, haunted by the memory of the day his family was torn apart. Taylor was riding his new bike when two rival gangs drove by, shooting at each other. A stray bullet hit Taylor, and he died in his parents' arms. Unable to sit idly by, Brian rushes to his work shed. He sweeps aside bottles of vodka and grabs his tools. Saya comes home and, after sitting in the car to gather herself, enters the house, looking for Brian. She sends him a text, but he ignores it, focused on something darker. Brian comes across Detective Vassell's card and heads to the police station. Brian spots photos of local gangsters on the wall. He takes out his phone and begins snapping pictures, his rage intensifying when he sees a photo of Pla, the gangster who shot him. Determined to take matters into his own hands, he circles the 24th of December on a calendar, marking it as the day he will exact his revenge. From then on, Brian's life takes a sharp turn as he begins a relentless training regime. He works out daily, watching videos on how to wield a knife and other combat techniques. His obsession with revenge grows, driving an even deeper wedge between him and Saya. However, Brian remains fixated, completely consumed by the need to avenge his son. A few months pass, and Brian buys a used car. He feels a rush of excitement as he gets closer to his goal. Brian also gets firearms training, though he initially struggles to hit his targets. Nevertheless, he buys a stash of weapons and begins listening to police radio frequencies to stay one step ahead. As time passes, Brian becomes more proficient with his weapons and driving skills, readying himself for what's to come. One night, in a rare moment, Brian tries to reconnect with Saya, who misses him dearly. Despite her love for him, She has reached her breaking point and decides to move in with her mother, leaving Brian alone with his obsession. Frustrated and consumed with anger, Brian returns to his training dummy, taking out his rage. He then takes his car out for a drive, pushing himself to sharpen his driving abilities. By October, Brian has begun staking out the gangsters' known hideouts, taking pictures of their operations and observing their movements. Brian's physical transformation is complete. He has become a muscular and skilled fighter, able to hit his target at the shooting range with speed and precision. He watches from his car as Pla hands out cash to children, enraged at the sight. He considers attacking but holds back when he realizes there are too many kids around. Shortly after, Brian has a run-in with a gangster who shoves him to the ground, and to add insult to injury, the gangster's girlfriend dumps ice cream on him. On December 23rd, Brian tracks down the home of one of the gangsters and breaks in. The man hears a noise and goes to investigate, but Brian ambushes him, tying him up in his garage. The gangster, however, manages to break free and attacks Brian, stabbing him in the leg. The two struggle fiercely, but Brian eventually overpowers the man, stabbing him with a screwdriver and beating him into submission. On the 24th of December, Brian gears up for his final mission. He straps on body armor, readies his guns, and writes a note, knowing he may not survive. He takes one last look at Taylor's room, absorbing the memories. Before heading out, Brian visits Saya, who is staying with her mother. From a distance, he watches her drawing a picture of Taylor, her own way of coping. Brian then goes to Taylor's grave, bringing a birthday gift. He sits at the grave, crying for the first time in a long while. Opening the gift, he leaves it for his son. That night, Detective Vassal hears a noise and checks it out with his gun drawn. He finds a bound and gagged gangster with a note attached. The cops arrive, and Vassal reads the note from Brian, which states that he will take care of the things Vassal failed to do. The note also contains a flash drive filled with evidence Brian collected over the past year, detailing the gang's operations. As Brian drives, he hears a police report about gang activity and heads to the scene. He finds two gangsters robbing a couple and intervenes, ramming them with his car and stabbing one before killing the other. Brian feels sick after taking his first life, but pushes on. He arrives at the gang compound and throws a package over the wall. The package is delivered to Pla, revealing the severed fingers of the gangster Brian killed earlier. A shootout erupts in the city, and multiple police officers are hit. Brian drives into the chaos, shooting and killing gangsters as he goes. A man live streams the scene, and Pla watches it in real time. Pla realizes that Brian is the one behind the attacks and sends a message to his gang, ordering them to hunt him down. A car chase ensues, with Brian skillfully maneuvering through the city. However, more gangsters join the pursuit, and Brian's car takes increasing damage. Exhausted and injured, Brian pulls over to catch his breath. Meanwhile, Detective Vassal is reviewing the evidence Brian left him. Back at the gang headquarters, he orders all his men to return to the building to prepare for an all-out war. Brian pulls up just outside the building, listening to an old toy that belonged to Taylor, the music reminding him of why he is doing this. He checks his weapons one last time, ensuring everything is ready before setting out on a motorcycle to finish what he started. As Brian infiltrates the hideout, a convoy of gangsters arrives, and a massive gunfight breaks out. The chaos continues as Brian moves through the building, systematically taking down gangsters. His training shows as he easily dispatches those in his way. However, he is soon faced with Ruiz. The two engage in a brutal fight, with Brian struggling to gain the upper hand. Just as Ruiz is about to finish Brian off, an explosion set by Brian earlier distracts him. Brian takes the opportunity to stab Ruiz in the shoulder, but the fight continues. Ruiz recovers and lands a brutal suplex on Brian. The two men, now exhausted, both reach for guns. Ruiz fires first but misses, allowing Brian to disarm him and blow his head off. Vassal soon comes under attack from more gangsters, but he skillfully takes them out, finding his way to Brian. The two stare each other down, guns drawn. They then come under heavy gunfire from Pla's girlfriend. She shoots Brian and then hits Vassal in the arm. Brian, injured, crawls toward her and holds a gun to her head, but he cannot bring himself to pull the trigger. She takes advantage of his hesitation, shooting him twice before shooting Vassal, realizing he has no other choice. Brian finally shoots her dead. Wounded, Brian painfully gets up and grabs his gun. heading upstairs to find Pla. The two finally come face to face, and a tense shootout ensues. Brian is hit multiple times in his bulletproof vest and collapses, with Pla preparing to deliver the final blow. Just as Pla is about to kill him, Vassal shoots Pla in the back, giving Brian the chance to tackle him to the ground. Brian, filled with rage, beats Pla's face in before strangling him to death. As Pla dies, Brian locks eyes with him, picturing his son Taylor smiling at him. With Pla dead, Brian collapses, exhausted. As Vassal crawls over to Brian, Brian begins to see visions of Taylor's short life flash before his eyes, including a glimpse of what Taylor's future could have been. The movie then cuts to Saya at Taylor's grave, where a toy train circles his headstone. She finds a note from Brian and places it on the headstone before walking away. Like and subscribe for more.